We know about the civil rights militant group, the Black Panthers. We know their history and their story.
Mhm.
And then they even went fantasy on us and gave us a superhero called the Black Panther. Wakanda forever. Everybody liked that story. However, the Black Panthers is a real deal. And the Black Panthers came along long before the civil rights group, the militant group, Black Panthers, or a Marvel movie about the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers actually was a tank battalion for the U.S. Army during World War II. They was called the 71st Tank Battalion. They was the independent tank battalion of the United States Army. It ranks primarily consisted of African American soldiers. Now, during World War II, black soldiers and white soldiers were segregated. They didn't serve in the same units. So this all black tank unit called the 761st, and they were known as the Black Panthers after their distinctive unit insignia, which featured a Black Panther's head, and the unit's motto, which was "Come Out Fighting." Decades after the war, the unit received presidential citations for its actions. In addition, a large number of individual members received medals, including one Medal of Honor, 11 Silver Stars, and approximately 30 Purple Hearts. But let's get into their story before we talk about all the medals that they received for their bravery in combat. The 761st was founded and formed on the 15th of March, 1942. It was activated April 1st, 1942 at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. The battalion began training in M5 Stuart light tanks. You probably never seen any of those tanks unless you looked at a bunch of old World War II movies, and you will see them in those movies. These men learned how to maneuver, mount, dismount, and maintain a vehicle's 37 millimeter man gun and 30 caliber machine gun. Their final training was at Fort Hood, Texas, where they finally was upgraded to M4 Sherman medium tank, which had a 75 millimeter main gun, two 30 caliber machine guns, a 50 caliber machine gun, and a 2-inch smoke mortar. Okay, a Sherman tank. Have you ever been to the library on New Flosson Road? And there's a tank that's sitting over there by that swimming pool in that park. If
Yep.
you've seen that tank, that is a Sherman tank. That's the exact replica. Actually, it's a real tank. It's the tank of World War II. It's the
Hmm.
tank that actually won many battles. So that's the tank that I'm talking about. Most of these black tankers had to train in installations located in southern states such as Kentucky, Louisiana, and Texas. To be perfectly honest with you, most black troops was trained in the South because white officers from the South always thought they knew how to handle black men. They thought because they were not strangers to black men like men in the North were. White men in the North was really in those days, they really didn't know black people very well. So the white men thought they knew them very well. They thought they knew their camaraderie. And so when the government drafted black men into the military for World War II, they served and trained in the South. However, the white men in the South were just regular racist people who did the same things that anybody else did in the South toward black people. There were a lot of racial tensions during the training. I mean, I can tell you one thing. At one time, a black tanker went to town and he got beat up. And he came back to his battalion. Well, his comrades commandeered six tanks, a half track, and was going to go into the town and blow it up. But they were persuaded to stand down by a lieutenant colonel who promised to bring those white men to justice who beat the black tanker up. So these were not cowards at all. They were deployed after 2 years of training. They had to have more training. They really didn't have to have more training, but because the white army, since it was segregated, it was like it was two armies. It was like a white army and a black army. The white army, I just say that, make it easier. The white army trained the white tankers for 6 months and they sent them overseas to fight. The black army had been training their men on tanks for 2 years. Now, these black men was very conscious and aware of the fact that the white units are being sent overseas much faster with less training. But quiet as it's kept, this was done for on purpose. In World War II, the power that be in the U.S. wanted all of the glory. I know that sounds funny about glory in war, but there was glory in war. But they wanted all of the glory and all the battles won to be won by white soldiers. So they could get all the Medal of Honors and all the medals, and when they come home, they'll be the heroes, and they'll get all of the perks that heroes got back in those days. However, this was a world war, and they was fighting an enemy that was tenacious, had actually more military capabilities than the United States, and they quickly found out that they needed every soldier in the United States Army to defeat this enemy. However, the day finally came when these men was deployed. They was deployed, actually got an order on the 9th of June, 1944. The war had been going on for 2 years. They got a deployment order for overseas movement 3 days after the D-Day landing. Now, there were black men at the D-Day landing, just not the black tank squadron or battalion. Anyway, the battalion moved from New York City to Britain aboard a troop carrier on the 8th of September. Now, look how long this took. On the 8th of September, they boarded ship, brought all the equipment, and they went to England. And after being in England for some more training, they just trying to train the heck out of these guys. After being in England for even more training, they finally, in October, went to Omaha Beach, which was in France, because that's where the Germans were at. When they arrived with 6 white officers, 30 black officers, and 676 black enlisted men. Those were actually the tank drivers, and the officers were the tank commanders. And these men were all signed to General George Patton's U.S. Third Army. Have any of you ever watched the story Patton, the movie with George C. Scott? You need to watch that movie. It's a very good movie. It tells nothing but the story of it tells a story of tank battalions fighting in battles. But in that movie, there's only one black man in that movie, and that black man is sort of like an aide, like a caretaker of Patton, the general. All the tankers in the movie are white. Everybody in the movie basically is white. And it's supposed to be a true story about Patton, but it's not true at all. It's regular Hollywood whitewashing of the truth. Anyway, the unit saw action in France from October 1944. It fought in the Battle of the Bulge. There's a movie called The Battle of the Bulge. They don't show any black tankers in that movie, but they were there. They finally went to the Rhineland, which is inside of Germany. And they spent the final 4 months of the war on German soil. Now, a little bit about George Patton and how he felt about these black tankers. The 761st was about to enter combat, and General George S. Patton reviewed the battalion, and he made a speech to the men, which offered guarded vote of confidence in their abilities. Now, these black soldiers were standing in front of their tanks while General George Patton, America's best general in World War II, made a big speech to them. I'm going to read his speech. Quote, "Men, you're the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army. I would never have asked for you if you weren't good. I have nothing but the best in my army. I don't care what color you are, as long as you go up there and kill those Kraut SOBs. Everyone has their eyes on you and is expecting great things from you. Most of all, your race is looking forward to your success. Don't let them down, and damn you, don't let me down. They say it is patriotic to die for your country. Well, let's see how many patriots we can make out of them German Kraut SOBs." Now, in the movie, Patton, they use that line. They have George C. Scott using that very line. Let's make patriots of those German SOBs. But in the movie, they have him talking to white soldiers, not black soldiers. However, Patton took these men, took that tank squadron, and led them into battle. Now, Patton wasn't no big-time progressive liberal who loved black people. He didn't like them no more than anybody else. But he needed good fighting men, and he knew these men was good fighting men. He was also the first American military leader to integrate companies in his rifle company. When manpower got very tight, they had to do something. They had to do something. They couldn't, white men was being killed by the hundreds, and they couldn't keep all these black soldiers in the rear. So they needed to bring some black soldiers up front to help fight and help do things. Now, it's like, I'm going to show you something. This book, you might want to get this book if you can see it. I know it looks backwards on it on the screen. But this book is called Brothers in Arms, the epic story of the 761st Tank Battalion, World War II's Forgotten Heroes. And at the bottom, it is written by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You might want to read that book. Go to the library, and it'll tell you a complete story about these men. Now, they had a great comeback record. During the Battle of the Bulge, German soldiers who had raided American warehouses were reported to have disguised themselves as Americans guarding checkpoints in order to ambush American soldiers. In other words, you had a bunch of German soldiers dressed like American soldiers ambushing American soldiers. Patton solved this problem by ordering black soldiers, including the 761st, to guard the checkpoints. And he gave them explicit orders to shoot any white soldier at the checkpoint who acted suspiciously. If he had an American uniform and he didn't act like he was an American, kill him. That's what he told the black soldiers. You can see how this would work, because they had German soldiers dressing like American soldiers. Well, Germany didn't have any black soldiers. Okay. So when he had the black soldiers start checking the checkpoints, the Germans was in trouble because they couldn't come in and fake like they was American soldiers no more. They couldn't fake like they were the ones supposed to be coming to relieve you, because we knew that wouldn't be true. The battalion first saw combat on November the 7th, 1944, fighting through towns such as Miljovic, Victorville, often at the leading edge of the advance. In other words, their tank squadron was always up front. The fighting that the 761st engaged in was particularly brutal. The unit endured 183 days of continuous operation and employment. The 761st Tank Battalion suffered 156 casualties in November 1944. 24 men was killed, 81 was wounded, and 44 non-battle losses. The unit also lost 14 tanks and another 20 damaged in combat. In December, the battalion was rushed to the aid of the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne as part of the effort to drive the Germans from the vicinity of Bastogne. The battalion fought to capture the municipality of Tillet. In other words, those battles that you see all these movies, you're going to see a bunch of them now that it's Memorial Day, and the older channels, the AMC's and the TCM's, they will have a bunch of movies about World War II, and you probably will see movies Battle of the Bulge or or D-Day Landing, and you're gonna see very few black people in those movies. However, in real life, black people were in all of those movies. You may not even have heard of these divisions, but the Germans had a tank division called the Panther Brigade or the Panzer Brigade. And these were tanks that were superior to every tank America made. Most of the time, American tank rounds would just bounce off of those tanks. However, the 761st took control of a city from the 113th Panzer Brigade through 2 days of combat. They lost only 9 tanks in the process. They defeated those Panzer tanks. The 761st smashed through dozens of German cities and towns in their rapid advance through the Reich. In the final days of the war in Europe, the 761st was one of the first American units to reach Austria at the Enns River. Actually, they reached so many places until they started liberating concentration camps where they had held a bunch of Jewish people. Now, I have some testimonies from some of the Jewish people who actually witnessed these men coming to rescue them from concentration camps. In the final months of the war, Black American troops fired on Germany Nazi troops who had a stranglehold on Holland. And when they moved in, the 761st Tank Battalion and the 183rd Combat Engineers had participated in the liberation of Buchenwald. You've heard of Buchenwald, one of the most notorious concentration camps in all of Germany. And also Dachau. These concentration camps were liberated by these black men. To this day, this is in the words of one of the people who was liberated. It was about a 17-year-old Polish Jewish boy. He was sick and weak and emaciated. He said, when he saw these black men, they looked like giants who were not from this planet. He had never seen a black man before in his life, but he knew they was there to help him. The survivor continued. He said, the soldiers that day were crying. And he said he didn't understand. I could not understand why people wielding these big weapons and these guns and these big steel tanks would have tears in their eyes. The moment when I saw them was like a legend. I stood maybe 15 yards from the gate. I was watching them and I couldn't understand. This wasn't real. It was something abstract. This was something beyond time. I wanted to say something, but I just couldn't. And I saw them crying and taking care of wounded and dying. I saw hands of inmates lying on their elbows and stretching out their hands. Brother, I'm dying. Give me your hand. And they gave them their hand. They were crying. These African American soldiers crying because they could not believe the inhumane treatment that these people had been subjected to. They knew of racism and discrimination firsthand from back home, but this type of genocide they had never before seen or experienced in their lives. Suddenly, right in front of them, with their own eyes, they saw something far much worse than Jim Crow America. Because what happened in Germany to the Jews, that had never happened to black people in this country. And they just couldn't take it because they had been victims of racism. They understood and sympathized with these Europeans who had been dehumanized by other Europeans. They realized for the first time that racist treatment wasn't just white and black. There have been plenty of books written about these men. There have been plenty of stories written about these men. There was actually a documentary called The Black Liberators about these men. And these men, some are still alive today. One of them was Reuben Rivers. He's not alive today, but Reuben Rivers, for unusual heroism in serving with Company A of the 761st, was awarded the Medal of Honor. But he was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously, and that was in 1997. They had president citations. After decades of racial tensions in the United States began to ease, the battalion was belatedly awarded the President Unit Citation by President Jimmy Carter on 24th January of 78 for the World War II service. The 761st Tank Battalion Award became official on the 10th April 1978 by the Department of the Army. On November the 24th, 1947, they deactivated the unit and sent them to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And they were assigned to the regular army, which served again in the Korean War. They have a monument dedicated to the 761st Tank Battalion. It was unveiled at Fort Cavaros, Texas, during a ceremony attended by surviving veterans on November 10th, 2005, as a permanent tribute to soldiers who had served and continued to serve throughout the world for liberty, honor, and democracy. The monument features 4 black granite tablets surrounding a life-size marble sculpture of the 761st Tank Battalion. They got a black soldier kneeling on top of a black granite pedestal that's engraved with the tank on the front and a panther on the back. Now, there was one famous person who was assigned to the 761st, Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson, the most famous member of the 761st Tank Battalion. I know it sounds like this doesn't sound the right word, but he lucked out and he didn't have to go overseas to fight because he was being court-martialed for refusing to give up his seat on the bus on the army base. So they court-martialed him because he wouldn't give his seat up to a white person. And he was in uniform and he was a lieutenant in the army. And that saved him from moving with his unit to go to Europe to fight the Germans. They put him in another unit that never did go overseas. Now, those were the Black Panthers. So when you hear about the Black Panthers, it's actually named after black people, black men who served, black men who actually made a difference. These black men in this book, Brothers of Arms, it tells you of the battles that these men were in. And it tells you some of the horrific training or horrific combat situations that they had to go through. and it tells you about the life of a lot of these men. And these guys were some fighting people. They never did back down. They never did surrender. They fought to the death in their tanks if they had to, and they gave the Germans what you might expect. They were some mean guys, and they were some good fighters. So my recommendation to all of you, if you are interested and you want to learn more about these black tankers, is to go to the library or buy this book, the the Brothers in Arms. It's a real good book, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar did a good job. He's a historian. He graduated from college with a degree in history. He wasn't just a basketball player. So he really did a good job on his book. Now, the next half hour we got is question and answer period. Anybody got any questions about anything we discussed today?
Lee, how many was in their battalion?
In their battalion,
Yeah.
it was, let me see, I got that here somewhere. How many was in the battalion? Let me look it up because I don't want to give you the wrong number. I want to give you the exact number. They had 676 enlisted men and 30 black officers. So they had about 700 men in that battalion.
Hey Lee, what are some of the this is a little off subject. What are some of the things that you think they saw that had them crying that were
What they saw was they saw, I don't know, I don't know if you ever seen when we were in kids, me and Roslyn was in kids. I know they did this. When we went to high school, they showed us a picture, showed us a video of the Holocaust survivors as those camps were being liberated by American soldiers. And they showed all these emaciated people looking like skeletons,
yeah,
naked, coming out of those
yeah,
dungeons. I think you may have seen that.
I did see that it
And
was they
and
was
these
starving.
right, okay. And so these soldiers saw bodies stacked on top of bodies of dead people, and they saw these people who were starving to death, and they also saw they would readily give their sea rations to these hungry, starving people, but as soon as they ate something, it would just make them deathly ill.
Yeah,
So eventually, it was told not to, give their food to these people because they couldn't eat anything yet.
okay.
That was what they saw, and that's why they was crying. It's like I tell you, it's like when if you've never been in the military and you've never seen dead bodies or dead soldiers or and you 18, 19 years old and you've never seen that, when you see this stuff, it does affect you
Yeah.
totally.
So
Yeah.
when they brought them back and just distributed them across, that was kind of a way of I guess toning down to make sure that white people continue to get the credit because I'm sure they knew of what they did over in Germany,
Oh,
and
yes, they knew.
that's why they brought them back and broke them up.
That's exactly right. They knew the U.S. military knew, and when they brought them back, from Germany. They broke the units up. They didn't want the unit to be, they didn't have the unit no more. They broke it up and just put them in in 47, I think Truman desegregated the military. And so they broke up all them black units. But they did reactivate that 761st for the Korean War. but it wasn't all black anymore.
Mhm.
Okay, they still had the unit and the tanks and the tank unit, but it was integrated. And they always tried to downplay what black folks had done in the Battle of the Boat. If it wasn't, if they hadn't won Battle of the Boat, Battle of the Bulge. First, let me say it like this: the Battle of the Bulge was a counteroffensive by the German army trying to rout the American army that had came across the Rhine River trying to push them all the way into Berlin. Well, they counterattacked and they were winning. They was winning that battle. If they had won that battle, they would have won the war. But because they was killing so many white men and blowing up so many tanks, Patton and Eisenhower got these black tankers as well as black infantrymen and put them in that combat because they needed them. You know, if they had never needed them, they never would have put them in there. They would have
Okay.
kept them doing work of support, you know, back in the back, in the rear somewhere.
Mhm. Okay. I appreciate the knowledge. I got to jump back on this other Presbyterian meeting. Thank you, and I'll see everybody on Sunday.
Okay. Thank you for being here.
Mm.
All right, ladies.
Lee, I have a crazy question. So, um, did this have anything to do with, and I don't want to say spinoff because I can't say it's a spinoff, but I know we had Black Panthers here when I was younger. Did that have anything to do with, or did that come out of these group of men that have been in the service and are their children's? Did that have anything to do with these men at all?
I can't say for certain that these men were part of the Black Panther militant movement, but I know for a fact that the Black Panther movement and Panthers, they got that from the 761st Tank Battalion because they was fighters. And that's why if you remember the Black Panthers, they dress military and they act military and they took on the LA police for quite a while.
Yes, sir. I was just very curious because as you talked about them and talked about how strong and courageous they were, it was really a strong movement when I was younger, especially in the area, Laclede area, and it was just they were very, very like you said, militant, and they stood for what was right for the most part, but they were they were threatened. People were threatened by them because of even their look. And I think sometimes our children, will have that militant look, and they get that same uh whatever you want to call it. They get that same uh response because people are
Yeah.
threatened by the way they look. So I was just curious. Thank you for
Well, in the militant group, the Black Panthers, they really were not trying to be militant. They took up arms just because they could, and they didn't want the cops bothering them. But what they really used to do when they first started, it was to protect the black community from white aggression and to feed the poor and hungry in the community. And then they had some leaders that started doing some illegal things, and that's when the FBI and the cops started messing with them. And they got very militant and started having shootouts with cops. And so I do understand what you're saying because yes, that black people wasn't afraid of them at first, but after the news media kept pushing that how bad they were, then even black people began to get a little leery about them.
Thank you.
Mhm. Now, the only reason, the reason I like to bring out the things we did in World War II is because that was a very important period in American history. And we can't let the white Americans think or African Americans think that black people did not participate in winning that war against fascism. That's why, when you hear people trying to allude to calling people Hitler and Nazis and all that stuff, they don't know what they're talking about. They just talking. Nobody has been as worse as those Nazis on the human race. No one. And it took a concerted effort from white Americans and black Americans and all Americans and all of Europe to defeat that evil man. But I just like to make certain that we get our credit so black people will know that we was there. There hasn't been any war in this country that black folks did not participate in. Black people fought in every war against every enemy of this country. You're not an immigrant. You are an American. 100%. Period. Your ancestors were here when this country became America. Okay? You got to always remember that. Your ancestors was here prior to 1776 when this country got its independence from England. Everything that happened before 1776, England is to blame for it. Everything that happened to our people after 1776, America is to blame for it. But we were here. And so don't ever let anyone try to brainwash you into thinking that you're some immigrant that came over here on a boat voluntarily, because you didn't come over here on a boat voluntarily. Your ancestors was brought over here on a boat. We have never been to Africa. So when you hear people send them back there, you can't send me back to them. If you send me back anywhere, to be sending me back to Mississippi. That's where my people come from. They come from no Africa. My ancestors did. But anyway, any other question?
I don't have a question, but that was very informative for me because when I think about Black Panthers, I always think about the ones in the 70s that I knew. I didn't know it was some back in 1942, so I appreciate the information.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't either. I found that out a few years ago. I watched a documentary called the Black Liberators, and it was all about these Black Panther tank battalion. And they were the first ones to use that name Black Panther. So the Black Panthers that you see, the ones that we knew about in the 70s, that's where they got their name from. That's why they dressed militarily too, because they was trying to emulate the bravery of those men. So you're right. I didn't know about them either until I saw that. But I think I learned about them like in 1995 maybe, because that's when I really started taking this history stuff serious. And I started looking at documentaries, going to the library, looking at books, reading books, and next thing you know, I just couldn't stop. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
don't stop. You do a great job.
Amen.
you.
Amen. And
Right.
we appreciate you so much because we're getting a wealth of knowledge from you.
Absolutely. I was going to say the same thing. I'm grateful for your inability to stop because it's opening us up to things that we didn't know. And I'm like Miss Roz and Regina, I was completely unaware that there were Black Panthers prior to those, even before I got here. But that's all I ever knew. So to hear this has been really enlightening. And then you kind of took us to church on the don't let them tell us that we weren't a part of this history because we are. And that's so profound as well because we fought for this country. We created, we built this country.
That's right.
Those things were built on our backs.
That's
And
right.
it's so important, especially in this time where we have people in political power who are trying to erase and change history. Is so important for us to be able to carry these stories on to our children
Right.
because by the time our children are grown and begin having children of their own, the history of this nation and Black people specifically will be so convoluted that you won't be able to decipher the truth from what we've been presented with in storybook form. And then the other thing that was really interesting to me was how you talked about the Black soldiers in this battalion helping the Holocaust survivors. And I can completely understand how they must have felt because I remember in high school we went to visit the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And that was unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. And especially only haven't heard the stories that I've heard about slavery, but then seeing the portrayal of what those Jewish people went through in the Holocaust, it was really scary. And the only thing that I've seen, well, I can't say remotely close, but the only other depiction that I've seen that was so terrible was, what we can imagine of what they put Christ through, because they did not treat these people as humans at all. And it was just terrifying to even imagine what they went through. So I can't for to say that someone who was familiar with how Black people were treated during that time in the States recognize someone else's pain as greater than what they've seen with
Yes.
slavery and racism here. That's a lot.
That's a lot. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. That's why I want to make sure I read that portion because that's being totally aware
Hmm.
of human suffering. How you have that's back to that you have a cross to bear, but other people have a cross to bear, and sometimes their cross is worse than yours.
Hmm.
And that's what these soldiers found out when they saw, all of these people that was suffering. It was like that's why they was crying because it was worse than what they had ever went through in their lives
Hmm.
and worse than they had ever seen, even though they weren't living in Jim Crow racist America.
Yeah.
But in Jim Crow racist America, we didn't have a genocide,
Hmm.
contrary to what some people try to make you think. When you do real history, you find out it was bad,
Hmm.
but it wasn't Adolf Hitler bad.
Right.
Oh no, oh no. But Natalie, that is I'm glad that you find this interesting because what you were just saying about people trying to change our history and trying to erase it, they're not trying to erase it, they're just trying to not teach it.
Hmm.
And that's why it's up to people like us to learn and teach the stories to our children, our grandchildren. So if they never get the true history from a school or library or wherever,
Hmm.
they'll still know it
Yes,
because
Hmm.
you need to know.
absolutely.
Yeah, because young people today are into so many other things, they don't care about their history. And when you get to the point where you don't care about your history will repeat itself, and you may end up in the same boat you were in 100 years ago.
Yes.
So that's the reason. I just think we need to know this. We need to realize, how we are Americans.
Yes.
Yes, we are African Americans because our ancestors came from Africa, but we are Americans, and we may as well realize that and come to love that fact because this is the only country we have. This is the only country we know. We don't know any other country. You can't go to some other country and think they're going to love you because they're not.
Mm-mm.
And that include African countries. They don't even love each other sometimes in Africa.
Mhm.
But anyway, these Black Panthers, There were some real soldiers, real fighting men, and they did some great things. I mean, in that book, Brothers in Arms, it tells you individual stories of sacrifices that some of these men made. And it also tells you some of the battles that they fought in and the conditions that they were under and what they had to actually survive in order to stay alive. And I didn't want to get into that because that's too much. That's why I recommend to you to all of you to read Brothers in Arms by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Anthony Walton. That it's a good book. It's a good read, and it's not hard to read. It's a nice book. It's not horror stories, but there are some things in there you will be shocked to read. So that's my recommendation to you.
Thank you for
What's the name of the book again, Lee?
The book is Brothers in Arms,
Okay, thanks.
and it's a good read. Right now, I don't have next month's session worked out, and I'll let you know though,
Okay.
Natalie, when
Okay.
I do, because I'm thinking about some things, but I'm have to think about it a little longer before I can come to a conclusion
Okay.
on which one it will be. But
Sounds
yeah,
good.
I just wanted to bring this up. I want to do this because we're close to Memorial Day.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's fitting.
Memorial Day is all about paying respect to the GIs that have passed on, and I wanted to talk about some GIs that passed on. Some of them are still alive, but they're real old men, and they won't be here with us very long. And they did some magnificent, wonderful things to keep the Europeans free from Adolf Hitler.
Hmm.
Hmm.
You
All
can
right, well,
say
Lee, even though you don't have your next topic, don't be trying to take no break on us. Don't do that to us here.
No, I'm not. No, no, I'm not getting ready to take a break. I'm not getting ready to take a break. Don't worry. By the end of this month, Natalie will know.
And
Because
I'm going to
I'm going to let
share
her
on the
know.
website as soon as I know.
That's right. She'll put it on there by the end of this month. I gotta get my mind together and find out exactly what I want to talk about. I have a lot of history around here. I just have to pick a subject. You know what I wanted to do, but I think Pastor would not like it. I really wanted to do, I want to do a session on blacks in the Bible.
Hmm.
And I'd have to talk to him about that before I do that because some of the main characters of the Bible that we hear, well, they was Jews and they was Hebrews, but that's not a race. Jews and Hebrews, that's just a religion.
Hmm.
Okay. Some of these people that see in the movies that they always depict as white people were not white people. They were black people. Most of those people. To be perfectly honest with you guys, nobody in the Old Testament was white. Nobody.
Hmm.
Now just take that. Remember what I'm saying. Nobody in the Old Testament was white. Period. Nobody. And I've researched this very, very thoroughly. No one. I'm gonna give you a little hint. But I gotta talk to Pastor first. Most of the people in the Old Testament was African and Afro-Asiatic. And what that means is they was either from Africa and black, or they was from Asia and black.
Hmm.
Okay?
Hmm.
So don't let nobody, people, Hollywood and the European world has brainwashed the whole world that Moses was white, Pharaoh was white, Abraham was white, and all that stuff is that's just false. That's false. But I'll talk to him and see what he says. He may he may not want me to do that, but because sometimes they don't want you to bring because I have people say all the time, what difference does it make what color they were? Well, it made a difference because God picked that particular part of the world to put his people in. That's why it
Mm.
makes a difference. He didn't pick London, okay? He didn't pick France.
Mm.
Jesus wasn't born in Europe, okay? So, but anyway, I'm thinking about that. I'm gonna see if I can get Pastor to go along with that.
Okay. Well, let me know. You know, I'm gonna set it up whenever we get
I
ready
I know you are.
to.
Anyway, that's it, y'all.
Well,
That's all I got for you tonight.
thank you so much, Mr. Robinson. We truly, truly appreciate it. As we say all the time, we appreciate you for doing it. We appreciate you for the studies you've put into it, the time and effort you put into being able to present it to us, and just enlighten us to these other topics. A lot of us at our big age have not heard about some of this stuff. So it's really wonderful
Mm.
that even now we can continue learning and learning more so about our own history. So thank you for that.
Yes.